Good morning, students. Today, let us go through the chapter The Walrus and the Carpenter. Now, this is a narrative poem that first appeared in Through the Looking Glass, published in 1871. This was written by Charles Lutwidge Dodgson, and his pen name was Louis Carroll. The poem is recited by the twins, and it is a poem depicting Carroll's usage of humorous fantasies and childlike verses. So, we'll start with the poem. The sun was shining on the sea, shining with all his might. He did his very best to make the billows smooth and bright. And this was odd because it was the middle of the night. Now, the sun was shining over the sea at the middle of the night, which was something odd. And because of the brightness of the sun, the waves of the sea could be clearly seen. The moon was shining sulkily because she thought the sun had got no business to be there after the day was done. It's very rude of him, she said, to come and spoil the fun. Now the moon was sulking. Why? The moon was getting angry. It was not liking that the sun is shining at the middle of the night because the sun's function was over by the end of the day. And after that, it is the moon's business to shine at night. Now, the sun was shining at night, and in this way, it was spoiling all the fun because the moon was losing all its brightness. The sea was wet as wet could be, the sands were dry as dry. You could not see a cloud because no cloud was in the sky. So it was a time when the sea was all wet, sands were all dry, and there was no cloud in the sky. It was a clear sky. No birds were flying overhead. There were no birds to fly. And obviously, it was the night time, so no birds could be seen in the sky. The walrus and the carpenter were walking close at hand. They wept like anything to see such quantities of sand. Now, both the walrus and the carpenter were walking side by side, and they were getting exhausted by seeing such quantities of sand. The sea beach was all full of sand, and it was making it difficult for them to walk. If this were only cleared away, they said, it would be grand. So they thought that if all the sand could be cleared away, it would be very easy for them to walk and find out things for which they had gone to the beach. If 7 maids with 7 mops swept it for half an hour, do you suppose, the walrus said, that they could get it clear? I doubt it, said the carpenter, and shed a bitter tear. So the walrus said that if 7 maids with 7 mops are given the function of cleaning the sea beach of all the sand, will they be able to clear all the sand? The carpenter said, no. Oh, oysters, come and walk with us, the walrus did beseech. A pleasant walk, a pleasant talk along the briny beach. Now, the walrus and the carpenter had gone to the sea beach looking for oysters, and they found only sand. They could not see the oysters because they were in the oyster bed. So the walrus thought of a plan and started to trick the oysters, and he said that, oh, oysters, come and walk with us. We are having a pleasant walk at the beach, so please come and walk with us, and this is all. It will be a pleasant walk, and we'll talk merrily. So we cannot do with more than 4 to give a hand to each. So four of you can come along with us. So we'll join hands and walk together and have a pleasant talk along the beach. The eldest oyster looked at him, but never a word he said. The eldest oyster winked his eye and shook his heavy head. So one of the oldest oysters just winked his eye and shook his head because he did not want to go, meaning to say he did not choose to leave the oyster bed. So he didn't want to leave the oyster bed and go along with them. But 4 young oysters hurried up all eager for the treat. Their coats were brushed, their faces washed. So, young oysters, who were all young and energetic, they got up and they got very excited and they said, "All right, we'll join you." So, they became very eager and they brushed their coats, they washed their faces, cleaned their shoes. And this was odd because they hadn't any feet. They hadn't any feet. Obviously, oysters don't have feet, but still they cleaned their shoes also. 4 other oysters followed them, and yet another 4. So, when 4 oysters went along with the walrus and the carpenter, then another 4 got ready. By watching that 4 of them are going, another set of 4 got ready, and then another 4, and in this way, many oysters started following them. And thick and fast they came at last, and more and more and more. So, they had thick shells with them. Oysters have shells. So they all started following the walrus and the carpenter, all hopping through the frothy waves and scrambling to the shore. Even from the waves, from the oyster bed, they started coming to the shore and started following them. The walrus and the carpenter walked on a mile or so. So, with so many oysters following them, the walrus and the carpenter walked for a mile, and then they rested on a rock conveniently low. So for a mile they walked, and then they rested on a rock which was a little low. It wasn't so high, and all the little oysters stood and waited in a row. So when the walrus and the carpenter started resting on a rock after walking for a mile, the other oysters stood in front of them in a row. "The time has come," the walrus said, "to talk of many things." So the walrus said that now we can talk of so many things, of shoes and ships and sealing wax, of cabbages and kings. So there are so many things to talk about, of shoes, ships, sealing wax, cabbages and kings, and why the sea is boiling hot and whether pigs have wings, and why the sea is so hot and why pigs have wings. "But wait a bit," the oysters cried, "before we have our chat, for some of us are out of breath and all of us are fat." So the oysters said, "All right, but wait a little so that we can relax and take deep breath because we are fat and we have been walking so fast." "No hurry," said the carpenter. They thanked him much for that. So the carpenter said, "All right, there's no hurry, you can relax." And the oysters thanked the carpenter. "A loaf of bread," the walrus said, "is what we chiefly need." So, when the oysters started resting, the walrus said that what we need is a loaf of bread. "Pepper and vinegar besides are very good indeed. We need a loaf of bread. We also need pepper and vinegar. Now, if you are ready, oysters dear, we can begin to feed." So the walrus said that what we need is a loaf of bread and some pepper and vinegar, and we can start a meal. So when the walrus said like this, the oysters started turning blue in fear. They started suspecting that it can be possible that the walrus wants to eat us up. "But not on us," the oysters cried, turning a little blue. So the oysters said that not on us. You won't have a meal of oysters, we hope. After such kindness, that would be a dismal thing to do. The oysters said that you've been so kind, you have invited us for a pleasant walk and a talk along the sea beach. It would be very unkind on your part to eat us up. "The night is fine," the walrus said. "Do you admire the view?" So the walrus started changing the topic and said that, "Don't you see how beautiful the night is? It was so kind of you to come, and you are very nice, and you are so nice. You've come along with us." The carpenter said nothing but cut another slice. The carpenter was a little rude and he didn't say anything, and he started cutting the slices of bread. "I wish you were not quite so deaf. I've had to ask you twice." "It seems a shame," the walrus said, "to play them such a trick." Now the walrus started feeling bad that they were trying to trick the oysters and eating them up. After we brought them out so far and made them trot so quick, The walrus said that it is very unkind, wicked on our part to make the oysters walk so fast and come out so far and make them walk so quickly. The carpenter said nothing, but the butters spread too thick. So the carpenter started buttering the slices of bread. I weep for you, the walrus said. I deeply sympathize. So the walrus said that I am weeping for you. I am feeling like crying for you. I deeply sympathize. With sobs and tears, he sorted out those of the largest size. So the walrus started weeping. He also started picking out the fat, the bigger oysters from among the whole lot and keeping them on a pocket handkerchief before his streaming eyes. He was weeping also and picking out the largest oysters and putting them on his pocket handkerchief. "Oh, oysters," said the carpenter, "you've had a pleasant run. Shall we be trotting home again?" But answer came there none. Now, what happened? Once the oysters were put on the handkerchief, the carpenter ate them up. And after he ate them up, as he ate them up, he asked them a question that we've had such a pleasant walk. Now, would you like to go back home? But there was no answer. Why? Because he had eaten up all the oysters. And this was scarcely odd because they'd eaten everyone. So they had eaten up, both the walrus and the carpenter had eaten up the oysters, so they could not get any answer. So this is the poem. And I hope you understood all the lines of the poem, how the oysters followed them and what happened in the end. Let us discuss some questions orally. What was odd about the night? Why was the moon sulking? So, as you know, the sun was shining brightly at the middle of the night, and this was very odd, and the moon was sulking because the sun was still shining in the sky and spoiling all the fun. Why were the walrus and the carpenter weeping? The walrus and the carpenter were weeping because they were feeling bad that the oysters had been so friendly with them and had come along with them, and still they were planning to eat them up. Whom did the walrus and the carpenter beg to come for a walk? The walrus and the carpenter begged the oysters to come for a walk. What was the eldest oyster's reaction? The eldest oyster winked his eye and shook his head. He did not want to come along with the walrus and the carpenter. How far did the young oysters walk? The young oysters walked for about a mile. What did the walrus wish to talk about? The walrus wished to talk about so many things like shoes and ships and sealing wax of cabbages and kings, and why the sea is boiling hot and whether pigs have wings. Why did the oysters turn a little blue? The oysters turned a little blue because they suspected that the walrus and the carpenter would eat them up. Why did the walrus and the carpenter invite the oysters? What was their real intention? The walrus and the carpenter invited the oysters to have a pleasant walk along the sea beach, but their real intention was to eat them up. So, these are some oral questions which are based on the chapter. Let us take up some difficult words in the chapter. Billows. Billows means waves, the waves of the sea. Sulkily means complainingly. The moon was sulking, getting angry, complaining. Beseech means beg. Dismal means sad and horrible. A dismal thing to do. What was the dismal thing to do? The dismal thing was that they were going to eat up the oysters. Streaming eyes, eyes filled with tears. So these are some difficult words in the chapter. Okay, so this is all for today. Thank you.